In a hospital early in the morning, a nurse records the time of death in the medical record. The cold light in the room doesn't turn off. The heart monitor no longer displays activity. And for a moment, everything seems still, even the air. The family, holding hands, can't say anything. The body there still looks like the one who was loved, but something crucial is gone. It is in this exact interval between life and what comes after that one of humanity's biggest questions gains real weight. What happens to the soul right after the last breath? Most religious traditions have their versions. Some speak of reincarnation, others of the dissolution of consciousness. There are those who only see the end of an eternal and absolute silence. But there are also those who believe that something begins exactly there when everything seems to have ended. And within the Christian vision, it is not the end that dominates this hour, but the beginning of an invisible, profound, and eternally consequential journey. This issue that happens in the moments and days after death is rarely explored in depth. Eternal life is talked about as a future concept and resurrection as a distant event. But the immediate interval between the last heartbeat and eternity is rarely given attention. What does the soul see? What does she feel? Is there awareness? Is there memory? Is there direction? There are answers. In Christianity, we are not given over to total mystery. The Bible, although not always in direct language, offers powerful, consistent, and comforting insights into this process. She reveals that this moment is not the abandonment of the soul, but rather its transition. What seems like an end is, in fact, a displacement, a crossing, and not a cold and lonely crossing, but one that takes place under the gaze and action of God Himself. There is a little commented curiosity. In studies of near-death experiences, many report sensations similar to separation from the body, expanded consciousness, and the presence of something greater. Although science does not confirm life after death or validate spiritual doctrines, these reports continue to emerge in clinics, hospitals, and research centers around the world, creating a point of intersection between faith and human inquiry. But Christian faith goes beyond sensations. She states that there is a purpose in death, and more than that, there is a journey. Not a static wait, but an unfolding of defined events. From the writings of Solomon to the records of John in Revelation, there is a clear line that connects the last moment on earth to eternity. A line that passes through the separation of the body, the encounter with the Creator, the revelation of destiny, and spiritual awakening. Death is not random. It is a defined boundary between two realms, and crossing it is not a leap in the dark, but an entry into a place we already know. There are passages in Scripture that deal with the soul as something that moves, that perceives, that feels, that remembers. It's not like falling asleep. It's not turning off. It is, on the contrary, a beginning of consciousness in another layer of reality, a layer that is closer to God than any temple or prayer has ever been. When thinking about this, perhaps the most honest question is, if everything we know as reality disappears, but our essence continues, what does that essence find? Who receives it? What defines your path? And perhaps even more provocative, are we really prepared for this encounter? Within this silence that follows death, there is more movement than one imagines. The world doesn't see it, but something is moving. There is a disconnection from everything earthly and an approach to what is eternal. The body remains, the soul continues. And that is where the most significant journey of existence begins, one that is not measured in time, but in truth. It is this sacred and invisible territory that we now enter, not with the rush of the curious, but with the reverence of those who understand that there lies something definitive, not out of superstition, but out of faith. And because of the need to understand what, in the end, gives meaning to life, what happens right after it ends. It's not the heart stopping that determines the end of life. It is something more subtle and deeper, the exit of the spirit. In silence, without fanfare, at the exact moment that the body stops supporting consciousness, what the Bible describes as the return of the soul to its creator takes place. The body is matter, structure. But the spirit is the breath that sustains it. And when that breath withdraws, visible life ends, but the existence of the soul continues. This concept has been present since ancient times. The book of Ecclesiastes, written around 1,000 years before Christ, already recorded this movement clearly. The dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God, who gave it. This is not just a poetic idea but an objective statement of separation. The body is not abandoned, it simply fulfills its natural cycle. But the essence that makes us conscious, capable of loving, feeling, thinking and believing, that part does not dissolve with death. She returns. Many try to understand this process as something symbolic, but Christian tradition maintains that there is a real and immediate transition. This becomes even more evident when we look at the way Jesus' death is described. In the oldest gospel accounts, dating from a few decades after the events, there is a revealing scene. When Jesus is on the cross, his last words are addressed to the Father. "Into your hands I commend my spirit." This delivery is not a metaphor. It is the moment when the body is exhausted, but the soul heads towards the divine presence. There is no delay. There is no suspended waiting time between the last breath and what comes after. The scriptures do not speak of an unconscious sleep or a pause until the end of time. On the contrary, they show that the soul maintains consciousness after separation from the body. One of the most striking examples is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, told by Jesus himself. Both die. One is comforted, the other tormented. Both are conscious. Both recognize their conditions. There is no shutdown. There is perception. These reports have supported, for centuries, the understanding that life after death is not a suspension, but a continuation. On another plane, with another nature, but with full lucidity. This does not negate the pain of physical separation, nor does it ignore the sadness that follows grief, but it reinforces the reality that there is something beyond matter. The soul, freed from the limitations of the body, begins to exist in a state that is not one of passive waiting, but of movement. Christian theology calls this the intermediate state. It is not the final judgment, it's not the resurrection yet, but it is a real stage where the spirit remains alive. Death, in this sense, is a door, not a wall. It does not destroy the person, it just interrupts life as we know it. This understanding also finds resonance in many contemporary accounts. Studies on near-death experiences, conducted since the 1970s, indicate that patients in cardiac arrest report consciousness during periods when the brain no longer shows electrical activity. In 2014, research published by the University of Southampton in England investigated more than 2,000 cases and found curious patterns. Visual perceptions, a sensation of body displacement, and even verifiable memories of situations that occurred while the person was clinically dead. These experiments have no doctrinal force, but they reinforce the idea that human consciousness can persist beyond the biological function of the brain. For Christians, this is nothing new. It is confirmation of what faith has always maintained. The soul does not depend on the body to exist. However, what happens after this separation is not generic. It is not a random scatter in the universe. It's an orderly step. The soul does not float aimlessly. She moves towards what corresponds to her. For those who lived in alliance with God, there is a certainty of welcome. For those who reject this path, separation from the divine presence is also real. This is where faith stops being an abstraction and becomes the foundation of hope. Knowing that death does not represent dissolution, but displacement, changes the way we view time, pain, aging, and even the end. The spirit leaving the body is not an error in biology, nor a collapse of chance. It is the fulfillment of something that has been from the beginning, a cycle between creation, existence, and return. At that moment, the visible world can no longer keep up, but there is continuity. What begins here is not silence. It is the continuation of a story, now in an environment that is no longer limited by time, flesh, or human failings. The soul follows. And where it arrives, everything that seemed abstract becomes absolutely real. After the soul detaches from the body, the journey does not end in a void. It is driven, not by instinct, but by purpose. The next step, according to the most consistent accounts in Scripture, is an inevitable encounter, the moment in which the human being finds himself before his Creator. It is an instant of total revelation where nothing is hidden and everything is known. This moment, known as private judgment, is directly mentioned in the letter to the Hebrews, when it is stated that human beings die once and then face judgment. The clarity of this statement dismantles the idea of reincarnation or repetition of lives. There is no cycle. There is a destiny, and this destiny does not begin at the end of time, but in the instant after death. The particular judgment is not the same as the final judgment, described in the prophetic and apocalyptic books. The difference is in nature and scope. The final judgment will be public, collective, and universal. Private judgment is intimate, individual, and immediate. There is no waiting in lines, no need for spiritual bureaucracy. The soul appears before God, and there reveals who it really was, not just what it experienced, but what it chose to believe, value, and follow. This revelation is not mediated by words. God doesn't need to ask anything. This is not an interview, but recognition. It is as if the soul, when faced with the fullness of divine light, realized with precision what it really carried in life, its intentions, its bonds, its response to the call of truth. For those who lived with genuine faith, this moment is not a shock, but the fulfillment of everything that was expected. It is not about merit or religious performance, but about an alliance. The faith that shaped the steps in life now manifests itself as certainty in the face of eternity. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, even states that he preferred to leave the body to be with Christ, not as a vague expectation, but as a personal conviction. On the other hand, for those who reject the truth, this encounter becomes uncomfortable. Not because God stops you from getting close, but because your life has not aligned with the divine presence. Separation is a consequence, not an imposition. The soul finds itself before Him, who is the source of all justice, love, and holiness, and realizes that it has gone its entire life without turning to Him. It is important to understand that this moment is not just emotional. He is existential. Everything that seemed confusing or distant in earthly life is organized in that instant. The soul clearly understands what previously seemed complicated. The question is not whether God judges harshly, but whether the soul, faced with the truth, is able to remain in His presence. Jesus related a parable about this. A rich man who lived for himself and a beggar named Lazarus ignored his entire life. Both died. The rich man, immediately conscious, realized his condition of torment. Lazarus, in contrast, was welcomed into a place of rest. This difference was not based on social status or appearance, but on the disposition of the heart. The presence of God is not a neutral environment. She is active, intense, and absolute. There is no way to simulate who you are when your soul is exposed to such complete holiness. It's as if everything is illuminated at the same time, the truth of the past, the reality of the present, the destiny of the future. Nothing escapes. Yet what makes this encounter deeply meaningful is not just the judgment itself, but the manifestation of who God is. He does not reveal himself with coldness or distance. He who sees the innermost soul is also the same one who offered reconciliation through Christ. Truth and grace meet in this instant perfectly. For those who have accepted this reconciliation, being before the Lord is like coming home. It's not fear, it's safety. It's not punishment, it's communion. The God who seemed distant is now visible. The face that was only imagined in prayers now shines with a glory that no language can explain. This reality is expressed with powerful images in the book of Revelation. When John, exiled to the island of Patmos, had his vision, he described Christ with flaming eyes, a voice like the sound of many waters, and a face brighter than the sun. It was not the carpenter from Nazareth, it was the glorified Lord. The soul that encounters this presence has no doubt where it is. It knows. This is not guidance, but observation. This recognition does not depend on formal religion, nor on an impeccable record. It is rooted in relationship. Those who walked with God in life, even with failures, now stand before Him with freedom. And that is what turns judgment into a celebration, not a condemnation. When the soul finds itself before the Creator, everything gains its due place. What was confusing becomes clear. What seemed random shows its purpose. And God Himself is not distant or inaccessible. He is there, completely, intensely, undeniably. Once the truth is revealed before the Creator, the soul does not remain in suspension. She heads towards a destination consistent with her inner condition. There is no draw, no arbitrary luck. What happens next is a natural consequence of the choice made in life. For those who lived in communion with God, there is welcome. For those who have walked far from the truth, the distance is also real. What is established at this point is the separation between two spiritual realities that, although distinct, have coexisted since the first biblical accounts, the place of rest and the place of anguish. In Christian tradition, these two destinations are given specific names. One is known as paradise, a space of solace, peace, and divine presence. The other is called Hades, not as a final punishment, but as a place of withdrawal and awareness of loss. Both do not yet represent the definitive state of eternity, but they already fully reveal the result of the life that was lived. This understanding does not arise from recent interpretations. It is present in Jesus' words, especially when he describes the condition of two souls after death. One is taken to a place of comfort, the other awakens in torment. These are not metaphors. The language used is objective. The narrative does not suggest a state of unconsciousness or vague waiting. Each of the figures described by Christ is lucid, aware of where they are and why they are there. In the scenario described, there are elements that deserve attention. The rich man who lived for himself perceives his new reality with despair. He remembers his own life, feels thirsty, expresses concern for his still living family, and recognizes that his condition is the result of choices. He does not question the justice of what he is experiencing. He just regrets it. This demonstrates that after death, there is no room for justifications or defenses. Decision time belongs to life. Eternity only reflects this decision. On the other side is Lazarus at peace. The narrative indicates that he is taken, supported, and protected. There is no pain. There is no anguish. His new reality is marked by comfort, something he has never experienced in his earthly life. And this consolation does not come through social merit, but through surrender to God. The image that emerges is that of a place of true rest, where the soul no longer bears the marks of suffering from the physical world. The term paradise is used in other passages of Scripture, including in Jesus' dialogue with one of the men crucified at his side. When the condemned man expresses faith, Jesus responds firmly, "Today you will be with me in paradise." This statement reinforces the idea that the encounter with eternity is not a lengthy process, but an immediate one. There are no transition days, no steps to overcome. The soul is led directly into its new reality. Although heaven and Hades are not the final heaven and hell, they are not symbolic or provisional in the human sense. They are real, fully conscious states where the soul experiences the spiritual consequences of its journey. The difference between the two is not in the landscape, but in the presence or absence of God. What makes paradise so full is precisely the fact that God is there. What characterizes Hades is not just suffering, but distance from the Creator. Recent research reveals that belief in an after-death destiny is still the majority in many parts of the world. However, there is a sharp drop in belief in the existence of a place of punishment. Data published in 2021 by the Pew Research Center shows that, among Christians in the United States, more than 70% believe in heaven, but only about 60% say they believe in hell. This difference reveals a modern tendency to soften the doctrine of judgment, perhaps out of emotional discomfort or a desire for universal hope. However, the biblical message remains clear. Eternity is not a one-size-fits-all path. The existence of two distinct destinies is both a revelation and an appeal. Revelation because it shows that there is justice. I appeal because it is still time to choose. The Bible does not present judgment as a threat, but as a consequence. Each soul reaps the fruit of what it has cultivated. There are no surprises. What the soul finds is just confirmation of the direction it was already following. This separation is also presented as definitive. Jesus describes in the same parable an abyss between the two destinies, a space that cannot be crossed. Eternity offers no shortcuts or revisions. The decision belongs to the present time. After death, there is no way to change sides. This aspect of Christian doctrine is often one of the most challenging for modern thought. In a culture that values multiple choices and constant flexibility, the idea of an eternal, unchanging destiny seems harsh. But, from a biblical perspective, it is precisely this clarity that makes grace so urgent. Knowing that there are two paths reinforces the invitation of faith, not fear. Mercy is available, but it must be received while there is life. The soul does not go by chance to one destination or another. It is directed according to your inner condition. It's not about following rules or following rituals. What weighs on eternal destiny is the relationship with God. This is what defines, in the end, where the soul will find rest or emptiness. The reality that is revealed after death is not marked by inertia, but by perception. The soul, when crossing the boundary of physical existence, does not enter a state of unconscious waiting. On the contrary, experience a profound awakening. It is as if the inner senses, previously limited by matter, gained full clarity. This awareness does not reduce to memories of earthly life, but expands to a broader understanding of eternal truth. Within Christian thought, this new consciousness is active. The soul neither dissolves nor remains silent. She recognizes her new condition, understands her destiny, and begins to interact with the spiritual reality around her. The Apostle John, when reporting his visions in Revelation, describes souls that are fully conscious, in communion with God, and attentive to the unfolding of divine justice. They cry out, they watch, they wait. They are not suspended but engaged. This spiritual perception is described in Revelation chapter 6, where the souls of those who died because of faith are shown. They not only exist, but also express awareness of time, their histories, and even the injustices still unresolved on earth. They ask how long the Lord will wait to judge those who inhabit the world. This cry reveals more than longing. It shows that, even in the divine presence, the soul maintains a bond with the history it lived and the effects it left behind. This state, although free from physical limitations, is not static. It allows spiritual maturation. Some theological currents claim that the soul continues to grow in the knowledge of God, not because of a lack of something, but because eternity is too infinite to be understood at once. Direct contact with the Creator does not exhaust understanding. It only begins a discovery that has no end. The psalmist already intuited this possibility when he wrote that in the presence of God there is fullness of joy and perpetual delights. The word fullness in this context does not indicate a still state, but an ongoing experience. The soul doesn't just rest, it deepens. Each moment is a deeper dive into divine goodness, peace, and wisdom. This awakening does not happen in an environment of confusion. The soul does not need to orient itself or unravel mysterious codes. She is welcomed and guided. The Bible points to the presence of angels sent to minister to those who will inherit salvation. This action does not end with death. On the contrary, it intensifies. The heavenly messengers not only accompany the transition, but also seem to participate in this beginning of conscious spiritual life in the afterlife. The contrast between this full awareness and the limited perception of earthly life is striking. Here, the senses are affected by the body, by emotions, and by time. After death, the soul no longer depends on these barriers. She sees clearly, understand without distortion. What was ambiguous is now revealed transparently. This lucidity also brings out a deep sense of justice. The present time, with all its flaws, begins to be seen from a different perspective. The soul understands that no action was irrelevant, no gesture went unnoticed, and no suffering was in vain. This realization does not generate guilt or anxiety, but understanding. The truth is not punitive. She frees. Meanwhile, on the side of those who stayed, the absence is felt as a void. But, from the point of view of someone who has left at peace with God, there is an expansion. The pain is left behind. Questions get answers. And even the most difficult moments in life become meaningful when seen in the light of eternity. Spiritual consciousness in the afterlife is not an abstract idea, but a constant point in the biblical narrative. Throughout the sacred texts, there are records of encounters with spiritual figures who demonstrate lucidity, speech, memory, and emotion. This shows that the soul does not lose its identity. On the contrary, she becomes even more fully who she is. And if this awakening is real for those who walked with God, it is also real for those who lived far from Him. Awareness in the afterlife is not an exclusive privilege. The difference is in the experience. For some, it is the beginning of plenitude. For others, it is the beginning of absence. In both cases, there is perception. The silence of death is broken by the reality that reveals itself, and this reality responds not only to what was experienced, but also to what was chosen. There is no confusion or disorientation. The soul awakens to the consequences of its history, but also to something greater than itself. What begins in this new state is a life in another dimension, more intense, more true, and above all, definitive. The soul that awakens on the other side of life brings with it something that is not lost over time, the awareness of what really matters. And this consciousness, once understood, transforms not only eternal destiny, but also the way in which those who still walk under the sun see their own existence. When you understand that life does not end with death, your perspective changes. Everyday emergencies lose strength. Worries rearrange themselves. Eternity stops being an abstract concept and becomes a concrete reference for the present. This perception changes the way we see suffering, challenges, losses, and even joy. Each moment begins to be lived with greater intentionality. Death stops being a taboo and becomes a natural border, predicted, expected, not with anxiety, but with preparation. It's not about living in fear of the end, but with awareness of what comes after. Many people avoid thinking about death. They prefer the comfort of a distracted routine without existential confrontations. But this choice does not change reality. The only certainty that accompanies every human being is that, at some point, the body ceases and the soul follows. Ignoring this does not postpone the inevitable. It only prevents you from living wisely. That is why the scriptures do not treat this topic as a threat, but as an invitation. Invitation to live with purpose, with alliance, with faith. Invitation to recognize that there is a God who not only created, but who also receives, guides, and saves. This awareness should lead to deeper decisions, not just behavioral changes, but transformations from the inside out. Faith, when authentic, is not a mask nor an inherited tradition. She is the answer, a personal delivery to those who call us with love and truth. Eternity is not achieved through the accumulation of good deeds, nor through religious appearance. It is received by those who recognize their fragility and accept being led by something greater than themselves. Jesus never promised a life without pain, but he guaranteed that whoever believes in him would never be alone. He claimed to be the way, not one of the ways. This statement may seem radical, but it is only uncomfortable for those who have not yet understood the extent of grace. Because what he offers is not a code of rules, but reconciliation. It does not require perfection, but sincerity. With this base, the meaning of life takes on another color. Choices are no longer motivated solely by convenience or fear and become guided by eternity. Loving, forgiving, serving, and creating deep bonds. All of this takes on new weight when you see beyond the now. Because the truth is that death doesn't take anything that really matters. It only separates what is fleeting from what remains. Even the pain of absence for those who have lost someone who lived in communion with God can be overcome with hope. Grief is not the absence of faith. It is the recognition that the love was true. But when you understand that the separation is not final, longing is mixed with expectation. One day, the reunion will stop being a promise and become a reality, not as a memory, but as a restored presence. Living with an eye on eternity does not mean ignoring the present. On the contrary, it means valuing it more. Every relationship, every gesture of compassion, every ethical choice, every prayer made in silence, everything counts. Life is too short to be wasted on superficialities, and too long if thought of only as a body. The soul continues, and what she takes are not goods, status, or titles. It bears the marks of what was truly lived. The journey of the soul, as we have seen, is continuous. What begins with a last breath unfolds into separation, revelation, destiny, and consciousness. And that should be enough to make us wonder, are we living with the end in mind? Are we preparing the spirit with the same care as we cultivate our appearance? Are we building something that will stand the test of time? These questions are not to feed guilt, but to awaken lucidity. There's still time. There is still room to start over. The door is still open, not by merit, but by mercy. And he who leads the soul beyond life is available now, while the heart still beats and the conscience still hears. In the end, it all comes down to a choice, not a forced choice, but a revealing one. Eternity will not be a surprise. For each person, it will be a reflection of what they became while there was still time to decide. If there is anything that death teaches us, it is that life has immeasurable value, and that what really counts doesn't end with her. There is a continuity that goes beyond the grave, a history that does not end with the body, a purpose that spans centuries and reaches the eternal. And if that's true, then it's worth living as someone who already knows what comes next. If you enjoyed the content and want to support our work so we can continue to bring you more research and in-depth analysis, please consider making a donation of any amount. This contribution directly helps the channel grow and produce even richer materials. Thank you very much for your support. If you've made it this far, thank you for following this reflection. There is a lot that we can still explore together about topics that really matter, and the next video is already on the way. To continue this journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you don't miss out when new content is published. Also, take the opportunity to leave your like and share with anyone who might be interested in this conversation. Each interaction helps this content reach more people organically. See you in the next video. Until then.